Alrighty. So my agenda for today is to tell you very briefly about our year one accomplishments, spend most of my time on lessons learned, and then give you an update on our operational pilots. But specifically, I want to focus on our pilot with AARP. Let me take this opportunity now to introduce you to Mike Lee. Mike is the Senior Advisor for Digital Strategy at AARP, and he's going to be presenting at the second part of this presentation. Also, I wanted to let you know that I don't plan on doing an overview of our pilot. We did that in the first report out, but I will just, as a refresher, remind you that our pilot is about high assurance multi-factor authentication that is dynamic and risk-based and mobile device-based. So as a result, and includes biometrics. So as a result of that, we're pushing the envelope in a number of areas, particularly as we pursue certification, initially with Kantara and FICAM. So I am going to be rushing through this a little bit. We do have 20 minutes. Look forward to your questions at the end. First, with respect to accomplishments, we consider these to be the most valuable so far. First is converting our existing IdentityX platform into a hosted multi-tenant IDP service. Having our Kantara application accepted and preparing for certification, gap identification, our privacy assessment, and our interoperability and equivalence investigations. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. With regard to the first one, I'm just going to throw up a few screens here just to show you that we actually have accomplished something. These are some trust decks and relying party admin dashboard screens. These are some registration screens for our IDP. And then these actually some more registration related screens and some authentication screens. You'll see more on those as we go through the AARP pilot discussion. But I want to spend most of our time on lessons learned. At the May plenary, we only had a single slide on the lessons that we've learned. I'm going to go into more detail on some of these and also introduce some new lessons learned. Okay, first of all, conformance to standards inhibits some functionality. So initially, we're starting with our IdentityX platform, which has a proprietary web services-based interface. But we're converting that over to be open standards-based multi-tenant functionality. So to start with, the ability for an RP to dynamically select authentication methods is inhibited in some ways, because with some of the standards you can set a level of assurance, and that level of assurance can be mapped to a set of methods, but this limits the combinations available. So for example, if you map LOA to a cert plus PIN, but you have 6 other authentication methods that can be mixed and matched in different ways, it constrains you. Also, the SAML authentication context option doesn't include a code for biometrics, much less any individual modalities, although you can choose unspecified for that. 800-63 recognizes only certain methods as token types. So non-recognized methods can be layered on top of recognized methods, but they don't actually elevate level. And biometrics are only recognized for second factor authentication in order to activate another token, but not as an authentication token in their own right. Jeremy mentioned 800-63. That is the basis of Kantara certification today. Some functions must be performed administratively rather than dynamically. So for example, policy management, transaction policy, timeout control, things like that. Query for registered or bound subscribers, blocking and unregistering or unbinding subscribers would fall into that category. Also, authentication request does not allow for setting of geolocation boundaries. It's not one of the fields. Transaction description can't be passed. So for example, for display on the phone. So instead, we're having to use administratively set generic descriptions. However, this is good for privacy, not necessarily as good for security or troubleshooting purposes. Assertions may not contain additional context information, such as biometric scores, and there's no health check capability, for example, for the RP to just check, say, to the IDP, are you there? Next lesson learned involves privacy enhancements that they can sometimes add business difficulties. So, for example, implementing privacy enhancements can come at the expense of some business processes like troubleshooting, customer support, lifecycle functions, payment reconciliation, those kind of things. So, as an example, the use of random identifiers between the RP and the CSP puts more burden on the RP. So, what I mean by that is that the RP would now have to build the capability to map those identifiers to the identities in their system for use by administrators, customer support, and finance personnel, rather than or in conjunction with an IDP-provided portal. So these would come into play when you're doing some of those life cycle things like blocking a subscriber credential, reconciling payments. I don't know why my screen is jumping. Okay. Things, monitoring adoption and usage, providing Tier 1 and 2 support for trouble calls. Another one is interoperable credentials have non-obvious implications. So some interesting predicaments arise when you're issuing interoperable credentials. So for example, a revocation. If one RP blocks or unbinds a subscriber, when and how should this be handled with respect to other RPs who have bound to the same credential? I'm sorry, I don't know why my screen is jumping around. So if the reason is that the subscriber was found to have falsified their identity or committed fraud or something, the question is, what is the IDP's responsibility? Will they even know the reason? Some RPs also see this interoperability as a competitive disadvantage. One of the comments we received was, why should I enable my competition? There's also some branding considerations involved there. And then lastly, mapping of methods to LOAs beyond the minimum set can vary between RPs, and it's not clear how that plays in an SSO environment. Another lesson learned, there is some lack of standards around some critical processes and interfaces. So for example, there's no standards for sponsorship or binding, both for the process and the interface. So what does an RP have to do prior to and during binding in terms of authentication, invitation, sponsorship requests? There's binding occurs at two places, at the RP, at the IDP, and there's some kind of identifier linking those two. Identity proofing alternatives, the ability of an RP to specify whether an IDP should do identity proofing or not do identity proofing. And then interface options are either a custom API or using some kind of, this is for sponsorship, for some using like the sign-up, sign-on paradigm. There's also no standards for interface to an identity proof or attribute provider or to another identity provider. Also lack of standards about some things like what I'm calling the broker model. I don't know that there's really a name for this, proxy model, whatever, where there's a broker in between the IDP and the RPs. And that a broker could be an IDP that's then using a credential provider service like what we offer. And I do realize that you know, there is you could do this through redirects. But multiple redirects can be problematic, both from a user experience, user interface side, but also when you have these redirects, you know, we've been telling people for years to be really careful about, you know, some of the browser attacks, and when they see a redirect, your average person doesn't necessarily know what's going on there. And so, anyway, that's just one other area. Another area is that the standards tend to be a bit biased towards hard tokens and secrets. So, for example, you know, some of those requirements don't necessarily make as much sense when the credential is actually being delivered to the phone. And so, just an example of that is some of the notification requirements, but there are others as well. Also, the standard interfaces and profiles aren't really targeted at in-band applications. And this creates a problem for RPs developing mobile applications and wanting to incorporate Trust Framework compliant credentials. Also, the standards and Trust Frameworks don't seem to really acknowledge that someone has to pay. And so who is paying, how do you track for payment purposes, how does that impact privacy. They're really more geared for the free model, which is appropriate for lower levels of assurance, but not for LOA 3. So an example of that would be dynamic RP registration, which you wouldn't want to do before you had a business agreement in place with that RP. Another example is the binding of subscribers has another purpose beyond security. The RP is, in effect, agreeing to pay for that subscriber at that time to use that credential at their site. Some standards are still somewhat immature. Jeremy mentioned the OpenID Connect becoming very popular for commercial applications, but there is no quote-unquote official standard yet, as well as some of the underlying standards that it relies upon, like JSON. There's no FICAM profile, although it's meant to be in progress. It has been said to be a little too bleeding edge for some RPs. There's no certification scheme, and people get confused between what OAuth does and what OpenID Connect does. So there's a little bit of dichotomy in protocol use. The government prefers the proven SAML. This is overgeneralization, and commercial, the OpenID Connect or OAuth. But some people flinch at using the same credential for government and commercial applications. This one I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just suffice to say that the way OpenID Connect and SAML handle user attributes is different. We've been trying to build a common process flow, common interfaces, and we're running into some difficulties because OpenID Connect allows you to do it on a per request basis, whereas SAML expects you to do that as part of the upfront negotiations. Some differences there. With regard to RPs, RPs aren't easily motivated to use external identity services. Jeremy mentioned that as well. So finding the right use case is harder than it may seem. Many RPs are very conservative. Liability shifting is not acceptable in either direction. Large RPs have the resources to do it all themselves, and so they're not as motivated to use an external provider. And then also there's the problem that customer identity is the crown jewel. Not to mention that user authentication is part of an RP's security architecture, and so this is something that they're going to look at very, very carefully. So there's a continuum, between starting with where the RP is doing everything for themselves, they're self-contained, all the way up to the RP as a service provider, and RPs are rather can be slow to climb those steps. Other RP adoption challenges, if you try to put additional requirements on RPs, it can scare them away. And so some examples are you need to get certified, we need to review your privacy policy, you need to share your identity data with us, you need to implement SAML or OpenID Connect, you need to identity proof, we need to identity proof your customers or employees. And also some of the standard protocols can be a barrier to some less tech-savvy RPs that can get confused by that. There are some standards that are not keeping pace, with market demands. And so the one I really wanted to highlight was the whole modular, componentized, decoupled models are not yet widely understood or accepted, still mostly in the blogosphere, although I wrote that before the FICAM thing came out. So we are seeing some movement in this direction. It's all very positive. It's just moving a bit slower than we might like. However, these componentized models are more aligned with market demands, business needs, and a marketplace environment, and there are some privacy advantages to this too. But in our case, it's forced us to extend our offering to encompass two services, both a credentialing service as well as an identity service. So if you look at the three main elements here, the RP, the credential or token manager, and the attribute provider or identity proofer, in a credentialing service, the RP either does their own identity proofing or uses another service to do that, and then they also would use a credentialing service, and all the binding and everything would be done by the RP. In an identity service, the RP would rely on the credential manager to take care of the identity proofing, also either in lieu of or in addition to that they're doing themselves. So from 800-63 terms, if you look at the elements, an IDP, what I'm calling an IDP, basically encompasses the registration authority, CSP, and verifier, where the CSP, or the credentialing service, only catches those two on the bottom. The Kantara Modular IAF report, they're working on moving in this direction. This is the model that shows up there, as well as aligning with what's in the draft FICAM update as well. And we know that this is something that's been done in Canada for a while, where they're basically decoupling the identity part from the credential part. Lastly, an issue we've been struggling with has to do with equivalency of token types. There is no defined process for determining equivalence for comparable methods or compensating controls for certification purposes. So an example would be like token equivalence or notification of issuance. We have modeled a process based on a risk-threat comparison, basically asking the question, does this equivalent method provide equal or lower risk than the original? And we're using the SP 800-63 to find threats. However, the path and decision maker remain unclear, and this is problematic for us. We did the process of mapping our token types to the 800-63 token types, and which also includes, the table for how you combine them. And so what the method that we modeled is to compare the strengths and weaknesses of both approaches, as well as to then, look at the threat profile associated, threats and countermeasures associated with both approaches. And so I've taken the guts of this out, mostly just to highlight the methodology here for you. And the big lesson learned for us is certification isn't for wimps. So with that, I want to move on to our operational pilot. Our timing is a little off because we didn't start exactly at the right time. So Laura, please yell at us if we start to go into other time. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Lee at AARP, and we'll tag team this part. Mike?
Okay, great. I hope everyone can hear me. And we can just go past this next slide. Okay, and so for us, we're excited to be in this pilot, and as a member-based organization, certainly of equal importance to all the sort of technology foundations is how this yields a benefit for members, particularly at the moment they are signing on to our platform. And we certainly have business units, focusing on every element of this, from acquisition, retention, marketing, and then taking a close look at member experience online, offline, and from offline to online. And we're definitely interested in maintaining security for the member, and as we kind of expand our brand into whole family, the importance of being able to reduce the number of credentials per person, but also give more control to the member, and look at different use cases for family and across generations is important. And we do ongoing usability testing as a matter of course on our website. Next. And so we're have kicked off deploying the start of deploying IdentityX onto a production service in production called AARP Health Record. And I won't go through all the bullets here word by word, but essentially it is a Microsoft Health Vault platform for which we worked with a partner called Get Real Health that has a PHR platform, and we subset the Health Vault to our own branded tool called AARP Health Record Tool, and it's more of a worksheet where the member, and it's free for members, it's not open to the general public, use the worksheet to sort of collect personal information and other data that they would use to prepare for a visit to a healthcare provider. It was launched in June of 2012, and we see it as moderately successful. There's several thousand users on the system now, and this talks about some of the features, but I can just show you as we go to the next slide and actually look at it. So if you actually go to, I think it's arp.org/health record, there'll be a sort of a promotional landing page, and then there's a button there which takes you to what you see on the screen. So this is our standard site-wide AARP login, and it can be a special purpose page like this, or it could be a widget inserted into like a partner experience. And there's the, I guess, the so-called NASCAR collection of various social logins that we deployed as of July with Gigia. And then with the help of Kathy, we have mocked up and are starting to look at the back end to have a TrustX login. So next slide.
And Mike, they're giving us the hook, so we're going to have to speed up a little bit. Okay. I think this is where I go in. So this is where we register people, sponsor them for their credential, either through an email or through a sign-in, sign-up page. They pick their TrustX ID. They accept the privacy and terms and conditions. We use a QR code for linking to that. The phone to the sponsorship application. They download their the application. They scan the QR code. We collect the authentication data. We then notify them, and then they can use it for authentication by entering their TrustX ID. They're asked to authenticate using a mobile device. Then they select the transaction, approve it, and respond to the authentication challenges. They decide what data to share. This page is in progress. And at this point, you've accessed your AARP health record, and so back to Mike on that.
Yeah, just really quickly, what we're looking at is just the 6 tabs, and so when they come in here, they'll see this is my profile. Then the next tab is where I can enter in basic information about myself, contacts and providers row by row and categorized, but health history information, and the next tab is medications, vitamins, and supplements. I can fill those in and create records, list out allergies, and then there's a print button, and this is a feature that we've built, realizing that seniors actually have asked through focus groups, can I just print out the whole thing, next slide, into a little wallet card that I can take with me, and so that's kind of where the product stands now. And there are APIs for mobile on the Microsoft platform.
Okay, Mike, this is Laura with the Secretary. We're going to have to end the presentation and go ahead and move on to the Q&A that's specific to your project. So if, like we announced at the beginning, we are trying to keep everyone muted who's not presenting, so please keep your line muted. You do actually have the power to unmute yourself, but we would ask that you just leave yourself muted if you're not currently speaking, so if you're not a presenter or you're not being called on to ask a question. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you please press the little hand icon that's located on the bottom of the participant pane, or you can also chat. But we prefer that you raise your hand to speak. So if anyone has any questions, now is the time to press the hand icon, and we will unmute you. Thanks.
Are there any questions out there?
I'm not seeing any hands. If you would like to ask a question, again, please raise your hand using the hand icon. If you can't find the hand icon, just go ahead and chat to everyone and ask that you be unmuted to speak.
All right, I am seeing in the chat, Jim Fenton doesn't have a microphone handy, but he's putting a question in that he's typing in.
And while he types that, I do want to remind everyone, if you're a call-in user, which means you're using your phone, you're going to have to enter your attendee ID for us to unmute you. So if you need to, you may need to hang up and dial in again, and just make sure you enter that attendee ID. Then we'll be able to unmute you.
So Jim's question is he's not familiar with the term componentized services. Do you have a reference for that?
So the best reference at this point is the new FICAM documents that have come out, and also the work that's being done in Kantara, as well as the work that's done in Canada, although the term is not standardized. So you might hear it being used as modular services or something other than that. But the idea is where rather than having everything within a single IDP service, companies can specialize in, for example, identity proofing or token issuance or other areas. And I'm hoping that as we work through the functional model in the IDESG, those what makes up a component, the functions that are subsumed by that can be made clearer.
Thanks, Kathy. Another question from John Morkey. Question: during the lessons learned presentation, many items were marked cannot. Was this because of policy, what state-of-the-art, standards, or something else?
So most of the ones that I was referring to had to do with the underlying standards, but others of them had to do with what is currently incorporated in the existing certification schemes. In most cases, it wasn't a technology problem. We can do it technologically. It just you may not be able to do it in accordance with the existing standards.
Thanks. Andrew Hughes notes to everybody the FICAM work and Kantara work are proceeding in tandem. They're working to keep in sync. I think we have a couple more minutes for more questions if folks either want to raise their hand or chat to be unmuted to speak or type in a question. All right. Seeing none, I think we'll keep the bulk of time in reserve. I'm sorry, we just had two more questions that just popped up. Emil Chindicki asked, can you speak to the user experience and feedback to using your system?
So we're at a point where we have gotten some user feedback on the basic technology. That's been mostly through our research partner, Purdue, who's been doing some testing. The build-out of the front end, the new standardized front end, we have not gotten much feedback on because we've really just been putting the finishing touches on it. The AARP pilot is where we'll be getting feedback on that.
And then one quick question, will the slides be made available after the presentation? The answer is yes. Patrick Landry, in fact, this whole thing's being recorded and will be put online. And Bob Panera wants to know if you can summarize again how authentication works after the user initially enrolls their device. Right.
So basically they would try to access a function or a transaction at the relying party site. The relying party would issue a authentication request to us, the IDP, and that basically, using the standards, would be through a redirect process. We would issue a challenge to the user's mobile device. They would then basically access that transaction, respond to the challenges. We would then verify that authentication data, and then the results would be made available to the RP, who would make the access decision. So depending on the risk level of the transaction, the RP determines, what set of authentication methods would be required for that transaction, whether it would be just, proof of possession of the phone through a cryptographic check, or a PIN on top of that, or a biometric, or whatever.
Thanks. Two more questions. One from Rajiv Mishra, were there any privacy concerns?
Yes, there were. In fact, we had a privacy assessment done by a different group within Purdue, their cybersecurity group, and there was several privacy items that they identified. And so what we did with that is we reviewed them with our engineering team, and some of them have already been addressed within subsequent builds of the system. So, for example, the one thing that I mentioned about the identifier that's used between the RP and the IDP, we changed that identification scheme so that it's more privacy friendly. That's how we figured out that we ran into other business type issues as a result of doing that. So the other one they identified was that if we had been sending text over so that the user, when they got a transaction, it would be very clear to them what transaction it was that they were accessing. However, from a privacy point of view, there was concerns that the RP the IDP should not have any access to anything related to that transaction, and so that was something that was changed as well.
Thanks. I think we are just about out of time for this pilot. I do know Aaron asked if Kathy or Mike could describe their challenges in recruiting Reliant parties. There's another question: can you project when the ARP project will be available to members? Let me actually punt on the Reliant parties question, because I think that's something that should come up as a theme in the end. But Mike, can you talk at all about when the ARP project will be available to members, or how it will connect into medical records of a bigger community of health providers? And then we'll move on to the next presenter.
Yes, we're looking to start the integration process in the next, 2 or 3 weeks, just working with Kathy and our product team. And it's going to go out to a test population of somewhere under 100 people. Kathy, I think we're saying, late February, early March. And then we'll go from there in terms of opening it up wide.
Great, thanks. All right, given time constraints, I know there's a lot more questions, and I would definitely invite folks to follow up afterwards, preferably through the committees. But I think now we're going to hand things over to AMVA, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Mike.